Buying the wrong home in Indianapolis can cost you tens of thousands, and most buyers don't even realize the red flags until it's too late. So that's why in this video, I am gonna drive around to the 6 different types of houses and the 6 different things that you should really be cautious about if you're purchasing a home anywhere around Indy. So we'll talk about why some of the most charming older homes could very easily come with a repair or renovation bill, how flood zones and conditions around the home itself can add thousands of dollars per year just to your general housing costs, and some of the costly problems that inspectors don't always catch the first time around. I'm Jason Compton, a local realtor here in Indianapolis. My team and I have helped lots of families buy and sell in this market, and we've seen some of the costly mistakes that they've made when they don't know what to look for. So let's get into this. So let's start with one of the biggest hidden risks that you're gonna find in Indianapolis real estate, and that would be floodplain properties. There are more neighborhoods than people think. Your Crow's Nest and Rocky Ripple, which is close to Broad Ripple and Meridian Kessler. There are other neighborhoods across Indianapolis as well that some of those neighborhoods are in FEMA designated flood zones. And when you look at a FEMA map, it's pretty easy to see why some of these are. You have the White River that goes right through Indianapolis. You have the canal in Indianapolis. You also have Fall Creek, which is a creek that Geist Reservoir actually is dammed up, and the water is released from the dam in Geist Reservoir to the south and feeds Fall Creek. But all along Fall Creek, that's still a FEMA designated flood zone. And so you have a lot of properties that are in these flood zones, or you have partial pieces of the properties in those flood zones as well. So right now I can see the White River. It's right down here behind me. What's really crazy is that behind me you can also see this giant wall, concrete. This is the top of a levee, which goes all the way down this direction too, protecting the neighborhoods that you see behind me from potential floods. So this whole area, you can have a lot of properties, and some of those properties have actually been removed from the FEMA flood zone, and then others haven't. So if you find a place that you think is just absolutely one of the places that you can't live without, there's some things that you should think about. For one, if you buy a home in a flood zone, even though the chances of it flooding are probably exceptionally remote, your insurance company and likely your mortgage company, they're not gonna say so, and they're gonna require you to have flood insurance. So depending on which company you go with, I mean, that could add $2,000 to $4,000 easily to your annual cost of owning that home. Sometimes through the mortgage process as well, you can get lower appraisals whenever a home is located in a flood zone. In the end, can hurt you getting your financing, or it can hurt getting you as a seller of future buyers financing. Plus, it's one of the things that as a seller, it can reduce the number of potential buyers that you have for your home that are out there. Now, some of the most common things, or at least one of the most common things that we see in places like this, you can get a home that isn't terribly elevated. That can help to bring you out of a flood zone. Even if you're horizontally within it, you could vertically be out of the flood zone high enough. But if you're too low, you could be at risk for flooding in your basement or your crawl space, or just general moisture problems that you're gonna discover in kind of in different problems you see around the house. Also, on the insurance side, you have to be careful when you have a home in a flood zone. Insurance, just general flood insurance, may not cover it. You have to really look at the gaps that you can find in that insurance policy. And sometimes that's where people get stuck in an insurance claim. It's a gap they just couldn't see coming when they put the policy together. So some tips if you're looking at a home that might be within one of these flood zones. Of course, you always want to take a look at the FEMA maps. The FEMA maps are not something that are permanent. They can change as the years go by. So you can have a home that is in a flood zone and maybe now it isn't, or it wasn't at one point in time and now it is. And you also want to check the property's elevation, like I said. Obviously, if you're going across the White River and you're 1,000 feet in the air, that's out of the flood zone. There's only a certain point where that water can rise. So maybe getting an elevation certificate if your home is located within the zone, but it's elevated enough to where it's not, and you can prove that to your mortgage lender or insurance company if they're asking questions about that. And of course, you want to inspect basements and crawl spaces carefully. Places where water is pooled up. Do they have proper modern drainage systems with sump pumps to make sure that the water is definitely being taken care of and moved away from the house? And of course, you have alternatives. You can always look for homes outside of the floodplain, and they're in the same neighborhoods or very close to the same neighborhoods, and they have similar views and similar feels. You can also target homes that have flood mitigation already in place. So again, with the elevation of the house, maybe the house is raised, maybe it's on top of a hill and it's out of that flood zone even though it's horizontally within it. So next up, Indianapolis, it's known for a lot of its historic neighborhoods, but with all the charm that you get in a historic neighborhood, you can get a serious problem that comes up fairly often, and that's failing foundations. Areas like Irvington, Fountain Square, and where I am today in Bates Hendricks and other neighborhoods, these are neighborhoods that are just filled with homes that are 80 years old, 90 years old, 100 years old, and even more than that. And a lot of them will have brick foundations or stone foundations that over a long period of time, they have trouble holding up to the clay-heavy soils that we have here in central Indiana. So over time, the soil, it expands and contracts based on how much water it has in it. And you can get situations like this right here, where this part of this brick foundation has started to separate. And so of course, with this, you can have some foundation issues and support issues with the house. You can have water intrusion issues here as well. You can see a downspout right here in this area that probably should be drained a little further away. So stepping inside this house, I can actually feel the wonkiness in the floors. And bowing floors in an older home, that could be normal, but it could also be a signal to a much larger problem that of course is going to be pretty expensive to fix. But something like that, a foundation problem, you can get into the basement wall starting to lean. You can have chimneys that start to lean. And of course, all of these things are not cheap to fix at all. You can also get into financing problems. So once you have the inspection and realize that some of these problems exist, they have to be fixed. And so on a conventional type loan, maybe it could be less of a concern, but when you get into government style loans like FHA and VA, they can really be red flags to that lender and potentially hold up the financing. Some of these older historic homes, they don't really necessarily have basements. They aren't exactly supposed to be completely waterproof, but coming down here, you can still see right here, this is an issue that they've tried to patch up. You've got some foam insulation being sprayed into these gaps. I mean, that is absolutely not going to waterproof this thing. So common issues that we might see that aren't necessarily super obvious could be some stair step cracks in brickwork. That could be the start of something that you could see becoming a bigger problem in the near future. Also, doors and windows that might stick and have some difficulty opening and closing, and that's because the floors are a little bit uneven now. And if you get basements that are damp and musty, that can actually start to affect the floor joists above to make them a little bit softer, and that can make the floor sag as well. And you can get into some insurance hurdles with this. If there's been a major foundation repair or flooring joist repair, some kind of structural repair, they might require proof that that's been done in the past. And then of course, if you don't address these things, you as a buyer looking at these, you're coming up with questions about, why does it have these cracks? Why are the floors sagging? Why is the water getting into the crawl space? And for some inspection tips, a general inspector is going to point these things out, but oftentimes you're going to need somebody else, an expert, to give you a little bit more insight as to what the problem really is. And then of course, what is it going to be out of pocket to repair something like this? You have to look pretty closely, especially in older places like this, to see signs of potential problems for the future, or maybe problems that have been going on for quite some time. So what's a good alternative? Well, you can always, of course, still purchase a historic home. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but it's nice to know that if it's had foundation issues, those have been repaired, and you've got maybe waterproofing issues and waterproofing improvements. It's just great to have the documentation to see that those things have been done, and you also have the company who's done that, and if it's fully warranted, and is that warranty still in place, and how do you go about using it if you need it? And then of course you can get into newer builds in historic districts, because in all the historic districts around Indianapolis, there are always newer builds. Some are new builds on top of older foundations, and those foundations hopefully have been repaired, but the historic charm, the historic nature of the home, the architecture, it's been preserved to match the area. So now let's talk about something that isn't always visible. That would be outdated electrical systems. As this home built in 1900, there's no doubt it's not going to have an electrical system anything like what we see here in modern day. It could have aluminum wiring, but actually when you get this old, you start to get into more knob and tube wiring. And of course you have fire risks with that. This one has certainly a more modernized electrical panel, and you can see all of the breakers in here, and it's actually even nicely labeled too. So if you get into an older home like this, knob and tube wiring, aluminum wiring, the reason something like that's pretty dangerous, especially something like aluminum wiring, is that it can expand, it can contract, it can lose connection, and it becomes a major fire risk. When that happens, it can spark and create a fire. And then when you get a home like this under contract, oftentimes your insurance companies are going to ask about the electrical system. Has it been updated? And do they have some maybe proof of it being updated? And that of course can lead to sometimes financing delays. So in Indiana, we can expect, once you have a home under contract, to roughly 30 days for the escrow period. It can be a little bit longer or shorter than that at times, depending on the situation. But if it's, let's say we've got a close date 30 days from now, and you run into a situation like that where you can't get that insurance binder because they need some extra proof for something like that electrical system, you might miss the close date. Now, some of the common issues that we can find in a place like this could be warm outlets or flickering lights in different rooms. You actually see, instead of a modern electrical panel, you can see a fuse box. And then also when you look at the outlets, like in this case right here, this outlet, you could see maybe a 2-prong outlet, but this is a 3-prong, so we know that it's grounded. And if you have a home that doesn't have all of the electrical that's been updated recently, obviously this is going to be something that is pretty pricey to fix. I mean, you could be looking at easily more than $10,000 and upwards of $20,000 to modernize all the electrical systems in the house. And then there are several things that can scare buyers. Foundation, when you mention that, big time fear. But if you say electrical problems, also one of the things that can chase buyers away. So if you don't have an updated electrical system in your house, then you are seriously reducing the pool of buyers that you have. When you have it inspected, of course, the general inspector is going to go through and take a look at a lot of these things and make sure that some of these things have been done. And then you have to have an electrical expert, an electrical contractor come in and maybe took a look at some things that just brought up some questions. Also, if you see some wiring in the house, especially in a place like this where you can see a lot of it in the basement or the cellar, look for AL, because that can sometimes indicate aluminum wiring on the wire itself. And also pay attention to really frequent breaker trips. So if the breakers are tripping constantly and easily, that could be an indication that something needs to be done. And then also discolored outlets. Discolored outlets could mean it's heating up too much. And if it's heating up too much, or you actually do have sparks in that particular area sometimes, then of course that's an issue. And some of the better alternatives to some of these historic homes, of course, would be to limit your choices to those that have electrical upgrades for safety and modernization, better code, and of course, lending and insurance ease when it comes to taking ownership of the place. And then also these major renovations that have happened in houses, you can always ask for documentation of those. What company did these things, and when were the repairs, the renovation pieces actually performed? Now, Indianapolis, it has some of the most beautiful historic homes that you're going to find anywhere in the Midwest. But if they go a period of time with neglected maintenance, they can turn into money pits real fast. And we're not talking about some super funny Tom Hanks movie. There are a lot of historic neighborhoods in Indianapolis, and where I am right now, pretty close to the Old North Side and Heron Morton and Fall Creek Place. You can also get into Meridian Kessler and some other really popular, well-known neighborhoods. Some of these homes, these historic homes, they can be 80 years old, 100 years old, and some of them can be 120 years old or a little bit more than that. And the architecture, the appeal for them is stunning. Like where I am right now, I mean, these homes, we've got some newer ones next to it because some of these historic homes have either been torn down completely or they've They've been renovated so heavily to where it's essentially a brand new home on an older foundation. But right here behind me, I mean, incredible. Inside, you're gonna find tall ceilings, you're gonna find ornate woodwork, very original and handcrafted. You're gonna find big, beautiful porches. But of course, given that they're old, sometimes they have decades of deferred maintenance going on. So you can get into roof problems, HVAC problems, electrical problems, and you can even get into some more dangerous ones like lead-based paint or asbestos insulation. And fixing all of these problems, I mean, you can easily get into six figures doing that. And that is not fun money to spend on renovating an old historic home, or any home for that matter. So some of the reasons that you might want to be careful or avoid these homes. Major systems haven't been updated, then of course you're going to inherit those problems. If it was built before 1978, which of course all historic homes were, then it could have lead-based paint in there, or asbestos insulation, or asbestos in some of the tiles that you'll find in the house. And then of course, major renovation costs like roof replacements, plumbing overhauls, completely changing out the electrical system, or even structural repairs. Those things add up fast. $10,000 is really not all that much to spend for something like that. And some other common issues that you're gonna find in a historic home would be another expensive item, like drafty old windows, and that's gonna drive up your electric bills. Not terribly efficient when it comes to energy conservation. You can run into galvanized plumbing, which over a long period of time, it can be prone to leaks and low pressure situations. And then you can get into some sagging beams or cracked plaster walls or outdated wiring. And then some of the potential risks like financing barriers. You can get FHA loans or VA loans. A lot of times they won't approve homes with safety hazards. And some of the unfun renovations can blow your budget. I mean, you're talking $50,000. We've seen situations where it's going to cost easily up to $100,000 or more. And then of course you have resale concerns. If you don't fix a lot of these problems, buyers are going to be scared away by that. So what about some inspection tips? Well, if there's been any major repair work, you might want to ask for some permits to see if they were filed or they were necessary for the type of work that was done. Also, in an inspection, if it comes up to where they suspect lead-based paint, or if they suspect something has asbestos in it, then you can do some testing for that. And you don't want to be fooled by the cosmetic renovation, which we do see from time to time. You walk in and you think, wow, this place is fantastic, but it's really kind of that lipstick on a pig scenario. And of course, some of the better alternatives would be if some of those major renovations, major changes have been done already, and they have really good upfront documentation to show that it was done recently. And if you can get an older historic home where the actual charm of the home and the historic architectural nature of the home has been preserved, but all of those systems within the house have been modernized up to current code, and also just the more modern efficiency standards when it comes to HVAC and insulation and your windows and everything that goes into keeping your utility bills much lower. Low maintenance living, it can sound great, but if the HOA of the neighborhood isn't managed properly, it could cost you a lot of money. Now in Indianapolis and a lot of the surrounding suburbs like Fishers and Carmel, or over in Avon or Plainfield, condos and townhomes, they're super popular options, but not all the HOAs are created equal. Some are super transparent and they're very well funded, well managed, and then others are woefully underfunded and really seriously poorly managed. Buying into the wrong one could mean unexpected rising HOA fees per month, special assessments, and then of course, a lot of difficulty when it comes to selling your place down the line. Low maintenance always means more expensive. To see HOA fees between $300 and $500 per month, absolutely common, but you can get HOA fees that are $700 and even up to $1,000, a little more per month. So when you look at that purchase price, that absolutely doesn't tell the whole story as to how your monthly payment's going to look. And another would be underfunded reserves. When the reserves are low, that's when the special assessments can really be surprising and expensive. They can cost thousands of dollars. I'm actually in a condo complex here in Fishers right now, and just a few years ago, this complex was hit with a $25,000 per unit assessment to replace all of the siding on the buildings. And then also lack of control. You can be involved in some of the decisions a lot of times with the HOA, but sometimes your power is going to be exceptionally limited. So some of the common issues that we can see, and sometimes would tell you that maybe you've got a problem with a very underfunded or poorly managed HOA. So it'd be things like deferred maintenance. Do you notice some of the things that are usually taken care of by the HOA, like the common areas, just as an example, a little scrappy or like they need some work? Are there any special assessments? Sometimes there are. And then sometimes there could be one coming up in the future, or it's in question. And then you can have board disputes and politics, and that can actually get in the way of a lot of the decisions made by the HOA. Some of the potential risks that you might see with buying a place like this in an HOA, tightly controlled, would be your resale. Of course, nobody wants to be part of an overbearing or a really poorly managed HOA. And sometimes condo complexes or townhomes, they aren't VA or FHA approved. And so you wouldn't be able to use that type of loan to purchase that place. So some inspection tips if you're going to buy into a condo complex or a townhome complex that is managed pretty tightly by an HOA would of course be review the financial statements, the HOA financial statements and the reserve studies. And if you don't know how to do that, you can always reach out to us and we can help you along with something like that. You can always ask for meeting minutes. They should be provided for every single HOA meeting that you can attend. And you can also talk to some residents just about their experience with the board, especially if they've been there for a long period of time. And of course, some of your better alternatives would be condos with really well-funded reserves and then a history of proactive maintenance, getting on top of things before they're a problem. Also, some of the newer communities with really more transparent management. And then of course, there's the other option where you don't get into the low maintenance, like with single family homes, or you have townhomes that don't have an HOA at all, or it's one that is really a lot less restrictive and controlling over the property itself. One of the biggest problems that we see in and around Indianapolis, it actually doesn't start always with the home itself, but it starts with the water that falls on top of it and also that falls and eventually makes its way to the house around it. Now, Indianapolis gets a fair amount of rain. We actually get more than 40 inches of rain per year. That's more than what Seattle gets. And we're not unlike other cities, of course, but the issue is that rain here, it comes in spurts, it comes in bunches. So that water has to be managed, and it's managed by, in a house situation, your gutter system, your roof system, and if you have a basement like this, maybe your sump pump and your tile system around your house. So of course we can see issues arise when the roof is leaking and maybe you don't know it and it's leaking for a period of time into the attic or in the basement or a crawl space of a house. Now you can always have ways to battle moisture in your crawl space. You can have a sump pump in there and a tile system around the house that catches water that comes down through your gutter system, goes into that tile system, and then it goes downhill over to a sump pit and then it's pumped out of the house. But if you don't have that happening, then of course the big issue that can arise would be mold issues. Now you can have mold that's remediated, but if you don't fix the moisture problem, the mold is without a doubt going to come back. Now mold remediation, it can get up to $2,000, $5,000, and even more depending on how bad the mold problem really is. This one, just as an example, this basement's been painted. It really appears quite clean and moisture free for the most part. Now this house is old enough to where the basement wasn't really designed to be completely moisture free. So this isn't a space that you'd really finish. But if you get into a more modern house, then the water is managed. But even though that this is a dry basement, I can see on these walls, this is an indicator that water has been present in this wall. It's evaporated away and it's left this crystallization through here. Also, it's one of the things when you get into a basement or a house or closer crawl space, let's say you have access to it, trust your nose, because your nose is gonna let you know if it just smells damp, if it smells musty, or if you have something like this behind me, this dehumidifier is trying to remove moisture from the air. That's not always an indication that you have water in a basement. In fact, most basements, you should probably run one anyway because we're underground. And then if you do have access to the crawl space, or you can at least see it, this right here, this plastic sheet, this is a vapor barrier. And you should have something in here to prevent some of that moisture that comes up through the ground and into the crawl. You could also have a crawl space that's fully encapsulated, which is a much more expensive process, but super complete at keeping the moisture out of a crawl space. So some of the inspection tips is to walk the property as well. So if you see some of these things on the inside, that water is coming from the outside. How is it getting into the house? You can look, of course, for sump pumps, make sure that they're functioning correctly. You can look for sloping and drainage issues. Anything that's sloping towards the house could be a potential problem. And then drainage issues, the gutters on the house, they catch water coming off of the roof. They'll go into downspouts. It should be discharged away from the house. So good alternatives to homes that could potentially have systems that are outdated or not quite doing the job at keeping it waterproof would be modern homes with modern waterproofing and modern tile systems and modern drainage systems. Or making sure an older home like this one with a visible crawl is that making sure that it's encapsulated or that it has at least the minimum standard that you need in order to keep the moisture levels the lowest possible level that they can be in the crawl space or the basement. And then also making sure just that the drainage systems on the outside of the house are properly maintained and they're able to handle the capacity that is put on them seasonally. So as you've seen, Indianapolis definitely has its fair share of housing traps. Sometimes thousands of extra dollars a year to pay for that home. Historic beauties that have foundation issues, all the way to mold concerns and soil conditions that can literally shift your house around. I'm Jason Compton, your local Indianapolis realtor, and my team and I have helped countless families navigate all of these pitfalls so they know what to look for when they're approaching any of these areas with these types of homes. So if you're thinking about buying a home anywhere in Indianapolis or around it, don't go it alone. Reach out to us. Myself and the team will certainly help you find a home that's safe and smart and will help you look out for the things that you might be missing or that you should absolutely look for. And we'll catch you in the next one.